But I want to talk to Angela Smith, who is from the Australian Federal Police Association. She joins us now in Canberra because she's been one of many that have had plenty of reaction. Probably has plenty to say about the last chat that we just had. But let's focus in on the ACT and its moves that, well, they're not going to full decriminalisation of pot, but what it does mean is that you're going to be able to have private use, a couple of plants. Of course, on top of that, it is still illegal to procure the things that are required to grow the plants, but let's put all that to one side. It feels like the ACT might be the first place in the country that's going to follow California, Colorado and a lot of other places in the states to basically full normalisation here. What's your sense of what's happening in the ACT, and what do your members and the police in the ACT think about a change that is coming?
Hi, Paul. So there's some real difficulties here that this legislation is going to create for my members. It's creating confusion. We've still got Commonwealth legislation that sits over the top, which is the superior legislation. So nobody has an idea of how to charge anybody at this stage. So it's just all it's doing is creating more questions than it's answering.
Now, give me a practical sense of what part of those confusions are for your members, because as the law is being presented to us by the politicians who put it in place, effectively they're saying, look, as you know, if the police raided your house and they found 2 plants, nothing could happen. That seems simple, but where does it get complicated?
So where it gets complicated is that what this bill has created is you can. Under ACT law, you can possess 2 plants for personal use or 4 plants in your household. That's the limit there. But if we find, if you're out in the street or wherever, we don't have to go by the ACT legislation. There is Commonwealth legislation that sits. The Commonwealth legislation trumps ACT legislation. But the problem that we have is that the legislation that was in place worked very, very effectively. It allowed us to drug divert into the health system on a first offence. The second offence allowed us to hand over a fine, so a simple cannabis offence notice, which is about $100. A third offence and ongoing offences, you would then put those people before the courts. What's happened now is that the Commonwealth legislation doesn't allow any of that to happen. You just have to charge and put people before the court. But what it presents to my members is Commonwealth legislation is a superior piece of legislation. Why should my members now be put in this confusing situation where people are getting away with possessing cannabis and can't be charged under ACT legislation when there's that Commonwealth legislation that sits over the top? It just it's putting my members into a really difficult position to how do they now charge? They now have the discretion to charge with Commonwealth legislation, which they didn't utilise before, and they used a simpler system, which was putting them through the health system. So it sets up so many questions. It's not made this process any simpler. In fact, it's made it more difficult.
Bronwyn, I can see you're leaning forward. What do you want to say?
Well, it's a very simple proposition. The ACT is a territory. It cannot be allowed to be the beginning of the slippery slope for the rest of the country wanting to legalise marijuana. The federal legislation is not only the superior legislation, it is the legislation which has to be obeyed, and the Commonwealth should make it very firm that the legislation by the ACT purports to have passed should be simply refuted by the Commonwealth. And that means, and the way the police force works in the ACT is, and I'm very sympathetic to the interview we've just heard, the police who are active in the ACT are in fact federal police. And these people are on contract to the ACT government. But their obligation is to uphold the law. And the law says you cannot have marijuana.
All right, we'll break out into a full debate in a second, but Angela, before you go, clearly, things like public drunkenness, we know what all of this is like. Do your members have any concern that with effectively you being able to grow this and by code get stoned at home, that if somebody leaves the house, then there's a whole series of problems that your members will be dealing with?
This is the problem, that it kind of opens the door now for people to use a lot of cannabis It also doesn't speak to the road transport legislation. That's still in play. So if you use cannabis at home and then drive your car out in the ACT in Canberra, we can still charge you with drugs in your system, with cannabis in your system, take your licence away, put you before the court. So, you know, like there are so many difficulties with this legislation. It is not talking to any other piece of legislation. It's created far too many dramas.
All right, thank you so much. I do appreciate it, Angela. I know it's been a long day for you, and thank you. And you've certainly got a friend in this program. We're always on the side of law and order in all of its forms. Thank you, mate. And the Australian Federal Police Association President. A lot of alliteration in all of that. Angela Smith.